Hello everybody, and welcome to this presentation of the Elder Scrolls lore. In the previous episode, we went over the rise of the legendary Tiber Septim and his glorious conquest of Tamriel. However, as is often the case in the Elder Scrolls, the story is much more complex than it initially seemed. There are two sides to Tiber Septim. One is the great and noble warrior king, Talos, son of Atmora, the extraordinary man who led Cyrodiil and indeed all of Tamriel to unprecedented prosperity. This, of course, is the version of events that the Empire wants to be believed. And for the most part, the preceding account is accurate. However, it leaves out some crucial details. Some claim that parts of the story are embellished, and other sections entirely rewritten. This is allegedly a concerted effort to polish over certain aspects of Tiber Septim's life, character, and conquests. The obvious intent being to ensure that his legacy, the empire he rebuilt, is portrayed in a positive light. It's time now that we take a look at those accounts which have escaped the clutches of Imperial censors. Before we continue, it's important to make note of some things. The primary source for many of these contradicting claims is the Arcturian Heresy, written by Ysmir Kingmaker, also known as Wulfharth, also known as the Underking, but not that Underking. If you're already confused, I'm sorry, but it's not going to get easier. Recall that along with the name Tiber Septim, Talos took the name of Ysmir upon his coronation. Other figures throughout history have done this, so there are indeed multiple Ysmirs. It isn't stated outright, but the author of the Arcturian Heresy implies that he himself is the original Ysmir, demigod and patron spirit of the Nords. It's important to explain this because Ysmir is very much not a fan of Tiber Septim. He has good reasons for this, which we'll get to, but the motivation behind many of his assertions is clouded by hatred. Ysmir's claims might be genuine, or they could be a fabrication simply intended to obfuscate and sow doubt in Septim's divine status. It's clear that parts of Ysmir's story are definitely true, but it's hard to substantiate all of it. Which portrayal of Septim is the most correct one? I honestly don't know. Both sides are compelling though, so let's dive into this. First, we need to go all the way back to the beginning of the story. According to this version, Talos' given name wasn't Talos, nor was he born on the continent of Atmora. The man who would become Tiber Septim was actually born as Hjalti Earlybeard in the kingdom of Alcair in central High Rock. Hjalti leaves his birthplace at an unknown time and spends his youth in Skyrim, just as in the official story. During this time, the Greybeards issue the first of their calls. This summons is answered by Ysmir. Ysmir considers himself an absolute enemy of the elves, and of the Tribunal in particular. Ysmir in fact led his armies into Morrowind during the first Nordic invasion, where he was defeated by the hands of Nerevar, and supposedly driven to madness by Vivec. He later returned to Morrowind to support the Dwemer at the Battle of Red Mountain. Ysmir has a long history of battling the elves, and therefore believes that he should be the one to unite mankind and wage a war of retribution. When the Greybeards speak to him, however, Ysmir is blown to ash. He is not the chosen one. He then goes to seek out the one who is, and is issued a warning. Remember the color of betrayal, King Wulfharth. Meanwhile, Hjalti Earlybeard has gone to work for King Cuchulainn and leads his Syro-Nordic army to battle in the Western Reach. Thanks to Hjalti's shrewd tactics, the Reachmen are driven back. In the night, with the Reachmen beyond the walls of their fortress, Hjalti is visited by Ysmir. The two form an alliance. At dawn, Hjalti approaches the gates of Old Hraldan with a storm following above his head, the power of Ysmir. The winds were so strong that no arrows could penetrate it. With this protection, Hjalti was able to get close enough to the fortress to shout the walls down and allow his troops to pour in. It was here that the Nords dubbed him Talos, meaning Storm Crown. The combined forces of Hjalti and Ysmir then make quick work of conquering the minor kingdoms of western Cyrodiil and turn their sights to the east. The battle mages of the Nibene surrender before their armies, and the White Gold Tower is taken. It is then that, before he can be crowned emperor, Cuchulainn is murdered. Not by some faceless assassin of the Reach, but by Hjalti himself. The slaying was carried out in secret and was blamed on the Western Reach, still the enemies of Cuchulainn and ever the convenient scapegoat. The traitorous general claimed that he had been a target of the assassination as well, but barely escaped with his life. Grand Battle Mage Zurin Arctis then crowns Hjalti as Tiber Septim, new emperor of all Cyrodiil. Ysmir is sent to work behind the scenes in Skyrim and High Rock. Through level-headed diplomacy over many years, the two nations were made imperial provinces. The takeover of Hammerfell was not so simple. They were being consumed by civil war, which made diplomacy exceedingly difficult. Ysmir wanted to launch a full-scale invasion, but Septim was craftier than that. He decided to support the losing side of the civil war. The exact nature and extent of this support is not spelled out anywhere as far as I can tell. Whatever form it took, it was enough to turn the tide of the war. Once the Redguards were settled, the Empire of Cyrodiil was invited in. Although this union was not an entirely stable one. There was concerted resistance to the Empire's control of Hammerfell all throughout Septim's reign. At times, the province was on the brink of all-out rebellion. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's another tale for another time. Septim then wasn't sure where to turn next. Ysmir pressed on him the need to strike down the tribunal, obviously seeking his personal vengeance. Tiber hesitated, but the 4 centuries of constant war had run Cyrodiil's coffers nearly dry. Morrowind's abundance of ebony would be a highly valuable resource. Ysmir tempted the Emperor further by explaining that he may be able to use the power of the tribunal to defeat the High Elves, who would surely be their biggest threat. Tiber was convinced, and they went to war with the Dunmer. The armies of Tiber and Ysmir assaulted the Dark Elves with full force. In this version of the story too, it isn't stated how long the invasion lasted before Morrowind surrendered. One additional detail, however, is that the surrender was conditional. The armistice included an official imperial position of non-interference with the tribunal. Vivek and his cohorts would be allowed to do whatever they pleased within their borders, and the tribunal temple would be allowed to continue their religious practices. Morrowind was conquered, but Ysmir was denied his retribution. This, he thought, was the betrayal predicted by the Greybeards. Ysmir was furious. In response, he abandoned the Empire entirely. He had left his army behind, but without the Underking's power, Septim's campaign would be cut short. The idea of taking Somerset by force was made an impossible fantasy. In this version of events, there are still no details given regarding the conquests of Blackmarsh and elsewhere. They could have taken place either directly before or directly after the invasion of Morrowind. Sources are contradictory on this point, and it's not that important, so I'm not making a call either way. There is one bit of information I found, which comes from an obscure but still technically official source. The Imperial army led by General Potride laid siege to the Khajiit city of Senchal, which withstood extended bombardment. The general supposedly gave the city residents a chance to surrender, which was supposedly refused. Imperial soldiers then stormed the city. All its inhabitants, including civilians, were brutally slaughtered. This atrocity committed by the Imperial invaders might be an exception. It could also be an indication of the overall mercilessness of Cyrodiil's rapid expansion. Without additional details, though, it's impossible to say which. It's time now that we step away from the story according to Ysmir for a moment. The next piece we know of Tiber Septim's life took place during his expansive campaign and concerns everyone's favorite Dunmeri monarch, Queen Barenziah. There are a few different versions of Barenziah's biography floating around. The edition officially recognized by the Empire is substantially trimmed down. What follows is according to the original, unabridged, real Barenziah. Barenziah enjoyed a brief time gallivanting and adventuring the wilds of Tamriel in her youth before attaining her crown. Then the kingdom of Mournhold came to be in need of a new ruler, and playtime was over. Symmachus, general of the Imperial Army, newly appointed governor of Morrowind, and future husband of Barenziah, was sent to retrieve the rebellious girl. Upon tracking her down, Symmachus brought Barenziah to the Imperial City so she could be taught how to behave in a way befitting of her new position. That, and so she could obtain Tiber Septim's approval. Morrowind was now a domain of the Cyrodiilic Empire. The final say in who could occupy its throne would be the Emperor's. Septim was not what Barenziah expected. She thought she was about to meet a grim, gigantic warrior. In fact, though he was clearly experienced in war and was in excellent physical condition, Tiber Septim was warm, kind, and even jovial upon their meeting. It didn't take him long to approve of Barenziah. The Emperor promised that she would return home to Morrowind to take up its regency. He asked her, however, to stay in the Imperial City a little while longer and learn everything she could from its scholars. Barenziah pledged that she would serve Septim and the Empire in any way she could. She was in awe of the splendor of the Imperial City and deeply drawn to Tiber Septim. She meant every word of her promise. Barenziah stayed in a suite of the Imperial Palace and was provided a number of tutors. She occasionally met with the Emperor in the palace gardens. The two would discuss her studies, and Tiber happily provided some instructions of his own. Though Barenziah was apathetic towards matters of state, Tiber Septim had a way of making history and even politics interesting. Tiber explained his grand vision to Barenziah, his dream of uniting all sentient people of goodwill against the malicious. They became very close companions, and one day the pair embraced each other. They were in love. Tiber Septim and Barenziah proceeded in their affair with utmost discretion. After an unspecified time, Barenziah became pregnant, which should have been impossible for an elf of her age. Barenziah's Dunmer attendant, Drellane, recognized the signs and advised her to depart from Mournhold at once with the Emperor's blessing and have the child alone. The young elf refuted this, believing that she and Tiber would never part. Septim paid a visit to Barenziah that night, whereupon she professed that she was bearing his child. The Emperor was aghast. He knew that elves never had children so young. He summoned his personal healer, a middle-aged high elf, who confirmed Barenziah's condition, sycophantically attributing it to the Emperor's potency. Tiber Septim commanded his healer to undo it. The illegitimate child would be a threat to Tiber's heirs, and that would not do. The healer protested, explaining that elven women typically conceive only once or twice in their lifetimes, and sometimes never. This child could be her last. But the Emperor had given his order, and expected it to be carried out. Barenziah ran for the door, but was overtaken by darkness. Barenziah awoke to emptiness and despair. Tiber sent gifts and came for brief visits, but there was no more love between them. A week later, it was announced that Symmachus had requested that Barenziah return to Mournhold ahead of schedule. She departed ceremoniously with an array of new servants and a splendid wardrobe befitting a queen. Although she had gained much, including her throne, Barenziah had again lost everything she once loved. Tiber Septim's campaign over these few decades had been a roaring success. The Cyrodiilic Empire encompassed the vast majority of the continent. Even still, Talos' vision had not yet come to fruition. There were still the last kingdoms of the elves to be conquered. Cyrodiil's troops, however, were weary of war, and the Altmer would be their most difficult challenge yet. Without the power of Ysmir on their side, invading Somerset was practically impossible. While Septim weighed his options, the spoils from Morrowind started to arrive. What came in was more than just ebony. Pieces of the gigantic, unholy Dwemer war machine Numidium were retrieved. Tiber Septim was fascinated by the Dwemer and knew of their great power. He ordered Zurin Arctis to research the artifact. Arctis uncovered the stories of what had occurred at the Battle of Red Mountain, learning the Numidium's potential and aspects of its design. He reported to Septim that it may be possible to reconstruct the Great Machine. All it needed was a source of incredible power. With the Numidium in his control, Septim had what he needed to conquer the elves and fulfill his destiny. All he needed was to unlock it. Ysmir would be the key. Septim contacted his old ally and told him that he was right all along. They needed to kill the Tribunal and take their power. The Emperor invited King Wulfharth to join him again, so they could form a plan together. Ysmir's lust for vengeance had not subsided, and so he landed in Tiber's trap. Upon his arrival, Ysmir was ambushed by Imperial guards. As they fought, Zurin Arctis cast a soul trap on Ysmir. With his dying breath, Ysmir's heart roared a hole through Arctis's chest. He then turned back to ash, his soul and Zurin's both trapped. Once everyone was dead, Tiber Septim entered. He then retrieved the soul gem containing the power of Ysmir and Arctis, the power he needed to unlock the Numidium, the Mantella. With the Mantella at its heart, Tiber Septim used Numidium to lay waste to the Altmer and all else who stood in his way. All of Septim's enemies were crushed absolutely and without mercy. All of Tamriel then belonged to Septim, but he wasn't finished. He turned Numidium towards the kingdoms who had remained neutral throughout the conflict. Septim wanted complete and unwavering loyalty to his empire. Anything less needed to be destroyed. There was only one who stood in his way, Zurin Arctis. The battle mage had apparently not been killed in his fight with Ysmir. Although his life force was contained in the Mantella, Arctis lived on as an undead, known hereafter as the Underking. Arctis was horrified and infuriated at the use of his creation. The Underking fought the mighty war machine with all his remaining power and succeeded in blowing Numidium apart. The pieces of its body were scattered across the continent by the explosion. The Mantella fell into the sea. Over the coming centuries, the Blades would methodically recover the lost fragments of Numidium. Meanwhile, the Underking hid himself away, secretly searching for the Mantella in order to reclaim his lost soul. Now this really is the end of the story of Tiber Septim. We've learned over these 2 episodes that there are essentially 2 Tiber Septims. Determining which is the true Septim depends entirely on who you ask. At the start of this episode, I said that I didn't know which version of the story was the most accurate. That's because the answer to that question is neither, and both. Each version contains certain truths as well as probable falsehoods. They do not mesh together, which is what necessitated this 2-parter. What these 2 Septims share is having an incredible impact on the shape and history of Tamriel. No one before his time had witnessed anything like the conquests of Tiber Septim, and everything after his time bears the mark of his legacy. Even in the Elder Scrolls, there is no truer form of immortality. This has been Double Negative. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you on the next presentation of the Elder Scrolls lore.